Greetings, this is Phoenix XO, and today we're going to be talking about how Almond's unrealistic expectations and dating standards actually don't matter in the grand scheme of things. And for the uninitiated, the unrealistic expectations are typically the 666s, them wanting a man that be 6 feet tall, to be making six figures at least, so about $100,000, and also having six-pack abs. In a way, this video was actually inspired by something Cephas Cold mentioned in one of his videos. I'm not sure which one, but at some point he said that it baffled him that despite a man being on his grind and, working hard and such, that it baffles him that sometimes an almond will still pick a man of lesser value, or, a quote-unquote Pookie or a Ray Ray. And then it got me thinking, just how consistent are these standards, Because at the end of the day, if they're going to pick, whoever they want, then do the standards really matter? And then in terms of balance, and, being a reflection of what they desire, most of the time, do they even meet these standards themselves? Well, if you've been seeing how the dating atmosphere has been lately, I'm sure you would understand that the answer to that is no. Like, most of the time that's not the case. If nothing else, for the simple fact that not that many people make six figures. And even for men, not that many men make six figures. So, and then once you really think about it, in some instances it doesn't even matter, because there are high value men that still get divorced by, almond. When you think of high value men, you may be thinking of, at least for the monetary portion of being a high value man, Jeff Bezos, the divorce that he went through, and then the quote unquote entanglement that happened to Will Smith and his wife. So they're really successful, and it didn't even matter. What's also interesting about Almond wanting a high value man is something that Kevin Samuels actually brought up in one of his videos. Shout out to him. It was one of his conversations with a woman where he basically said that at a point they kind of make their own price in the instance of having children. Like if they had a child with a lesser man or a man of lesser value, then in that situation, why would they deserve a high value man when to have children with? They chose the lesser man. And when I mean lesser man, I'm not really talking about people that are trying to, do better on their grind. I'm talking about men that are kind of okay with not doing that much and, just aren't that reliable. Just good for one or two things that I'm gonna really love, and if you can read between the lines there. So then I thought to myself, if almond are setting a lower price for themselves for associating and having children with a lower value man, then is it possible that just in terms of mate selection, not even just talking about having children, just mate selection, is it possible that they're lowering their value in that regard as well? What I mean by that is, if they've been typically dealing with lower value men, or if that's their thing, and then they suddenly want a high value man, is it possible that maybe they're going out of their depth? Is it possible that maybe they're not being realistic in their expectations? Well, I think anyone here would definitely agree with that, and just the fact that 80% of almond think that 80% of men are invisible, but that's a whole other situation right there, which actually we'll get into right now. When you think about it, the notion of there being an 80-20 rule or a 90-10 rule seems kind of unrealistic. It just seems weird, because you would typically think that on a rating scale, and, if we rated every man and woman, almond, sorry, you would think 4s would go with 4s, 5s would get to 5s, and, 10s with 10s, things like that. But nowadays, because of, I would assume because of hypergamy and just getting a whole bunch of attention and validation online, Almen think that they can have it all, which they can't. And it's not because of their gender at all. It's just because that's not how life works. Some claim to be, just as good as men or better than men, but when it comes to it, they don't really know what it means to be a man. They may have, better jobs and things like that, but when it comes to like the responsibilities that come with being a man, they just typically don't get it. Because one of the big things that I'm sure all of you realize is when you're a man, you realize that you typically don't get everything. Hard work is a necessity, and what you can get with that hard work is typically what you earn, whether it be, cars, how much money, and, what type of almond you might try to go for. But for almond, that's not the case. Which brings us to the 666s. It feels so weird to say. First off, it seems kind of demonic when you think about it, but that's that's a conversation for another time. But anyways, when you think of the 666s, and then you compare them to almond, just on a equality standpoint, a lot of them don't match up to the standard that they hold for men. And then you think about it deeper, these standards are actually kind of disrespectful. What I mean by that? Well, in 2021, we've got things like the body positivity movement, which is basically just, not shaming anyone based off of their weight and, treating them like people, which on principle I'm totally fine with. But in practice, it seems as though it's just become an excuse for more almond to be more shallow and disrespectful. And it's a bit hypocritical when you think about it, when you're saying, okay, almond they can weigh whatever they want, but then they want to come back and flip it to where, okay, but men have to be 6 feet tall or have six-pack abs. It's like, the math doesn't add up. And at the end of the day, their body shaming. They don't want to talk about that, but their body shaming when they make demands like that. And when, in some cases, I'm sure you guys have been, disrespected because of it, ghosted, flaked, told that you're a lesser man for that in that regard, especially when the height is something you can't control. But something that I don't think gets brought up enough is the fact that almond tell men all the time that, they can't, we as men can't tell them what an almond is. And to a degree, I get it. But when you think about it, they can't tell us what a man is either, can they? Because one, that's not how balance works. And two, they, despite, in terms of ego and entitlement, them showing us their dick unsolicited, it's such a weird word, unsolicited, they don't have our equipment, and they aren't living the same lives we do. That's why a lot of people out there will say that, especially in the manosphere, will say that women, almond, are living life on recruit difficulty, or, like what Steph is Cold would say, they have all the cheat codes, and, as men, we're, like in an RPG, we're just grinding and doing our best to survive and get better the old-fashioned way. And then just real quick, we'll talk about the six-figure thing. Mathematically speaking, the average man doesn't make six figures. In fact, typically they make, statistically on average, about 40,000, right? So, reality is telling us and them that the whole six-figure man thing isn't, it's a lot rarer, and then when you couple it with the other two, the 6 feet and the six-pack abs, it seems crazier and crazier, which I think is one of the reasons why more men are just deciding, I'm either they're taking red pills and just, not dating and just playing the field, or they're guarding their wallets, if you know what I mean, and they're just not doing dealing with any of it, and you can't blame them. The dating atmosphere out here is kind of toxic, and yes, there are some toxic men out there, but I I just don't think people, at least in the mainstream, talk about just how toxic the other gender can be. And this brings me to another point. In a world where, you know, the idea is for equality between men and women, and women shouldn't be constrained to gender roles, gender norms, and the fact that they should just be accepted as who they are, flaws and all, bumps, whatnot. Uh, I'm fine with this as well, but they they want to be modern women, but they still want traditional men. They still want men to be. They still want men to stay the same and be the head providers, and try and put men into a box and say, okay, well, you have to accept us, but we're not going to show up in your lives or entertain you for real until you're at the finish line. Which is pretty, like, I never liked that idea because it just seems disrespectful to not just the man, but the grind. It's like, okay, so we're supposed to accept you for who you are, but despite the fact that there are many men out there who are grinding, and they have to start somewhere, doing their best and progressing slowly, you want to be disrespectful to get to the grind. Okay, sure. But the whole nice guys finish last thing, I think that idea is starting to die out a little bit, because men are starting to value themselves more and realize that, you know, we don't have to be traditional. That's why more men are deciding to just, you know, go on coffee dates or not spend a bunch of money on dates, not to be disrespectful or be less chivalrous necessarily, but because they've been burned so many times. They've had to waste money before being with, well, entertaining someone that didn't respect their time, you know, showing up late or flaking or showing up on their phones. And at the end of the day, they need to realize men aren't Costco. If they want a free meal, they need to go there. We're not doing that anymore. And if they want that, if they want men to pay for dates and things like that, personally, I think that better behavior is needed. You know, respect and things like that. But, you know, some people are so far drunk off their egos that that's going to be a problem. Especially trying to come to the conclusion that, you know, maybe mistakes were made on their part, but that's just me. And when you really think about it, generations before ours didn't have this type of negativity, this type of ego to deal with, especially in the black community. You know, things were rougher then than they are now, you know, financially, and when you go back to, like, what, the 30s, the 40s, things like that, well, decades like that, and there were still, you know, racism. There still seemed to be some kind of camaraderie and some type of, you know, team ethic between man and woman, Alman. But nowadays, like, if you've seen another one of Kevin Samuel's videos where he was talking to this young lady that was 24 in a pink hoodie, I think she might have been from, she sounded like she was from another country, but anyways, they were talking, and then she basically, in so many words, says, you know, well, no, I take it back. He asked her a question. He asked her, hey, so are things easier or worse for the average Alman? And she said that it was exponentially easier because they have all these opportunities and they can work, make their own money, and the expectation for them to settle down isn't really there. They're actually, they think, well, they're told that they can play the field for as long as they want, not knowing that there are consequences for being out there too long. That's beside the point. Anyways, she said that, and she also said that with all of these opportunities and all of this power, why then would they need or want to even be with a man? Which I feel like a lot of men either didn't know this was the case, or they decided, hey, This is what I've been talking about and thinking or feeling, and then it's finally been put into words, which is it's refreshing, but also a little sad because one, how freely she said that, and then two, just how many Almen have this belief out there, which is weird and disheartening. But they're living their lives, so we deserve to live our lives. So, in the greater scheme of things, their standards don't matter because they either don't follow these standards to a T. If you do manage to meet these requirements, there's no guarantee that they will stay or be satisfied, and overall, said standards are unrealistic and hypocritical. At face value, tethering yourself to any one with this mindset is an unfair and unbalanced deal. So what should you do? Because this whole situation is a bit novel, and at the same time, you want the best out of life that you can get. And I think that's what you should do. You should work on yourself, build yourself up, and if someone somehow shows up that is worthy of your time, someone shows up that's cool, then let them into your life if you choose. But be prepared for the worst, or just leave them. The divorce rate is about 50% right now, and 80% of those divorces are done by Almen, so be mindful of that. You should also be mindful of the fact that with all of this free intercourse, and intercourse with no strings, essentially just a dating, what do you call that? Basically, with intercourse being easier to obtain, it has devalued the notion of relationships and more integral things like just being loyal. So if you do end up being with anyone, just be mindful of that as well, and just know that there's a high probability that the old adage is "she's not yours, it's just your turn" is it's very real. But also on the flip side of that, you should think to yourselves, if they do leave and they either try to monkey branch or they somehow against the odds end up with a high value man or whatnot, just remember with how disrespectful some of these Almen are and just how unfit to be wives so many are. And that's not me, that's based off of fact, just the pair bonding going down, the constant gender war, things like that. With all that in mind, it would in this instance it would also be just her turn. He wouldn't be hers because you'd have so many options. Hence the 90-10 rule or the 80-20 rule, whichever you choose to believe. I say run your race at your own pace, and once you get to the finish line, speed right past them if you want. Just let them eat dust. They say they want cake. I say let them eat dust. If she doesn't respect the grind, they are entitled to respect, among other things. If no one out there loves you or cares about you as a man, at least care about yourself. We only get one life, folks, so why not make it your best? Give yourself what they never could. Better. Build your kingdom and keep your crowns up, kings. And remember, the queen may be the most powerful piece in a game of chess, but once the king leaves the board, the game is over. We don't have to surrender to them or suffer to them anymore, but we can still survive them and live the best lives we can. Doing good, So, thank you for listening. I hope this helps some people out there. And, as always, just do your best, and it all adds up eventually. Thank you, and have a nice day. This is Phoenix XO signing off.